Dear colleagues, good day, and it's my pleasure to invite you for our second plenary session. I would like to invite Professor George Markovsky for his keynote lecture, and I would like to introduce Professor George Markovsky. Professor George Markovsky received his bachelor degree in mathematics from Columbia University and his master degree and PhD in mathematics from Harvard University. He spent 10 years at the IBM Thomas Watson Research Center, where he served as research staff member, technical assistant to the director of the computer science department, and manager of special projects. He came to the University of Maine as the first chair of the computer science department in 1984. In 2017, he became chair of computer science department at the Missouri University of Science and Technology. He has also been a visiting professor at a lot of universities of different countries. He is currently chair and professor of software engineering and game development at Kennesaw State University. Professor Markovsky has published over 113 journal papers, book chapters, book review, and conference paper on various aspects of computing. He holds a patent in area of universal hashing. His interests range from pure mathematics to the application of mathematics and computer science to biological problems. He has also built voice-controlled and enhanced keyboard terminals for use by paralyzed individuals. Professor George Markovsky is interested in entrepreneurship and was the founding president of Maine Software Development Association. He also founded a software company, Trefoil Corporation, that developed their own software for the United States Department of Labor that replaced the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Professor George Markovsky has a lot of different honors, beginning from IBM Research Division Awards in 1979, and continue his identification in top 2% scholar in the Stanford study in 2021. I think we can talk about Professor George Markovsky a lot of time, but it's my pleasure to invite George for your lecture. Thank you very much for your presentation. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to, I'm sorry I can't be there physically in Athens, one of my favorite cities, but anyway, let's get started. So my goals are to help you understand better what's going on in cybersecurity, give you some insight into how you can go about protecting yourself, your family, and your organization, and give you some practical steps to improve cybersecurity, and finally, to think about cybersecurity strategically. Okay, so first, just kind of a scan of some random events. This happened 3 years ago, where the New York subway system was targeted by Chinese-linked hackers. People in 2020 were thinking we were going to be spending $123 billion in cybersecurity-related expenses. If you look in 2023, they were thinking that number is $215 billion, and it keeps going up and up. And you can see that cybersecurity issues are spilling out. Recently, in the past year, there have been a lot of attacks on court systems here in the United States. Here's a prison that was attacked. And in fact, what happened is because of the cybersecurity attack, people who were supposed to be released from prison were not released. These attacks typically involve ransomware, and they attack every sort of target that you can think of: hospitals, prisons. The cyber insurance market is increasing dramatically. And now people are saying things like, well, the losses from cybersecurity might reach $1 trillion in 2020. And, you know, and if we're spending 130 billion at the time, the losses are like 7 times what we're spending. Here's an article that's claiming the damages might total $6 trillion in 2021. One of the things to try to put some of this in perspective is this is the world economy in 2020, and you can see that the whole economy is $80 trillion, and to claim that cybercrime is between $1 and $6 trillion, if it's $6 trillion, it would be like roughly the gross domestic product of Japan, and would be, you know, the 3rd or 4th largest economy on Earth. And here, on the other hand, this is talking about cyber losses of 10 billion in 2022. And this is talking about people cutting cybersecurity spending in small and medium enterprises by 41%. This is showing rising expenses. I think the first question is, do you believe these numbers? Okay, they're all over the place. The estimates kind of range wildly from billions of dollars to trillions of dollars. And there's a huge variation. And you can sort of pick which numbers you want to do. It's also clear that the numbers are not mutually consistent. Different people come up with very different numbers. But to some extent, the exact numbers don't matter very much for this talk, because whatever set of numbers you believe, it's clear that cybercrime is a big problem. Okay, now how big, we can have arguments about how big, but it seems to be very big, and it seems to be penetrating every aspect of society. I mean, there are companies being hit, governments are being hit, hospitals are being hit, and, you know, so what's really going on here? So the point of this talk is to step back and review at a high level what we are seeing. And we seem to spend more and more money for cybersecurity. Our losses continue to increase and grow, and there does not seem to be an end in sight. And as we say, sometimes one definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. I think it's fair to say that with all the research and effort that we've put in cybersecurity, we still have a big problem. So in this talk, what I'm advocating is we step back and look at this big problem and try to approach it strategically and see if we can improve the situation, because what we're doing now is not successful. And so what can we do about it? Well, what I want to do is go back to first principles. So there are 2 general principles of problem solving. The first principle is to make sure you understand what your problem is. Okay, if you don't know what the problem is and you haven't defined it carefully, you're not likely to solve it. The second thing is apply Occam's razor. And this has been a long-time principle in science and technology, which is try to find the simplest explanations and not make things overly complicated, because your chance of solving the problem decrease as the problem gets more complicated. So you really need to understand what your problem is. And the issue is that we're really engaged in a multi-level cyber struggle. So that's the first thing. So what do I mean by multi-level cyber struggle? Until we sort of understand what is really going on, it's going to be difficult to solve it. And, you know, I want to understand that and then talk about a strategy for cyber defense. Okay, so by multi-level is that the cyber crime situation can take lots of lots of forms. So you can have individual hackers who are in it for various reasons, some having to do with ego. You have small criminals, you have terrorists, you have cyber espionage, organized crime, nation state, and finally, you can go from nation state cyber attack to nation state cyber enabled kinetic attacks. And by kinetic attack, we mean that you're actually now causing damage to equipment. It could be electronic generating equipment. It could be centrifuges, if you're trying to damage a nuclear weapons program. So it could take lots of forms. But the important thing to realize is that, that these various attacks are not just independent. In other words, you may think it's just an individual hacker or a small criminal, but it could be part of a nation state cyber attack. So number one is you have to understand that even nation states, like for example, countries like North Korea, can derive income from ransomware attacks, which are launched by agents for that government. So the situation is much more complex, and you have to understand what's going on. Now, you notice that I've also added insider threats. This is a big and often underappreciated aspect of cybersecurity. What do we mean by an insider threat? An insider is someone who's inside the organization, who is cooperating with any one of these entities in undermining the security of institution. Now, insiders could be deliberate, or they could be accidental in the sense that people who aren't careful, who are very careless with their passwords and things like that, could be an insider threat, even though they don't necessarily mean to be an insider threat, but they could still be an insider threat. And the important thing is that these levels are not important. I think that you notice that we have nation states in our previous slide, and I believe that these are the nation states are one of the causes of the difficulties that we have in cyber defense. And so this is not just we're dealing with a cyber struggle, we're dealing with a cyber war, and we are currently engaged in a rather active cyber war. And in some sense, you could really think of this as a world war, because every party is participating. And I mean, the United States has its own groups that infiltrate other countries are infiltrating the United States. So we have this very active cyber war, and people need to understand that when they're having cyber crime and whatnot, part of that could be related to this much larger struggle that's going on. Now, there's some interesting philosophers of war, and so it's interesting to look at what they said. So about 500 BC, Sun Tzu put together, we call it a book, calling The Art of War. And he had some interesting observations. And he said, and the first one is, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. And if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Well, I think that many people are in this third category here, where they don't know either the enemy nor do they know themselves. So according to Sun Tzu, they're in big trouble. Another philosopher of war is Karl von Clausewitz, whose manuscript, his sort of masterpiece, was published in unfinished form after his death. And he says, war is thus an act of force to compel our enemy to do our will. And, you know, we need a more general definition of war. Many techniques do not involve the use of much force. For example, you have biological warfare, where even a small amount of material can cause a lot of damage. And there's psychological techniques that threaten the use of force without ever actually using it. And some of the most appropriate definitions: war is the continuation of politics by other means, and it's a prolonged series of actions taken by political entities against each other in pursuit of their own political agendas, in opposition to the political agendas of other participants. And these actions must cause significant damage. And so some key points: to have a war, you must have recognized political entities with recognized political agendas. And if you look at the world situation, it's perfectly clear that there are many actors with recognized political agendas that are contending with each other. The agendas must have conflicting goals. It must be prolonged and not just a single incident, and it must cause some damage. And people use terms like war on drugs and war on poverty, but these are not wars, because there's not a political entity representing poverty, or there's but anyway, that's another use for the term war. So return to first principles. So what I want to do is say that the following 4 principles are very important if you want to mount a cyber defense. The first principle is know your enemy. We've already discussed this. Who is really trying to do you damage? Who's attacking you? Why are they attacking you? Is it a political agenda? Is it a financial agenda? What might they want to get? Number 2 is know yourself. What are your capabilities? What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? The third, what are your vulnerabilities? One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is they freely use devices from the Internet of Things, but these devices are not very secure at all. And if you start placing them all around, if you have cameras all over your facilities, many of those cameras are very easy to break into. And you have to realize that any opponents you have can be using those cameras to spy on you. You're using them for security purposes. The other thing is that the whole concept of cyber warfare, cybersecurity, is very abstract. And for a lot of people, they would benefit from having more concrete images of cybersecurity. And the fourth point, which is something that I think many people aren't aware of, is this concept of system accidents. And I'll explain that a little later in the talk. So these are the 4 principles that I want to stress that I think are important in building a cyber defense. Know your enemy, know yourself, make the abstract concrete, and beware of system accidents. All right, so know your enemy. We've already talked about, all the different groups that can be attacking you, and you notice they're sort of interlinked. And on top of everything else there's insider threat. Many organizations don't want to think about insider threats, but it's very important because an insider can overturn the best security measures you can think of. The United States learned about this through Edward Snowden, who, revealed a lot of secrets and did a lot of damage to the security posture in the United States. So this is always something that needs to be taken into account. Back in 2007, Linda Markowski and I did a paper. We did a survey of supercomputer centers, and we asked the following questions. Has anyone tried a physical approach to either disrupt a computation or steal data? And in 2007, 9% of the supercomputer centers said yes, somebody had tried a physical approach. 5% were not sure. So that means there were 14% kind of were suspicious that something happened, and maybe there were an even bigger problem. Has anyone tried to bribe or otherwise co-opt one of the cluster staff into helping with compromising security? Well, here there were 8% that were sure, but there were 13% that were not sure, which means they were suspicious. So almost 20% of institutions, this is 17 years ago, we should do an update, were suspicious that somebody had tried to bribe somebody. So this here corresponds to an insider threat, because if you bribe somebody, that person is on the inside and can put you in a very seriously negative situation. So it's not always easy to distinguish, and states can hide behind organized cyber vandals, cyber criminals, and to some extent these people act like mercenaries or privateers because they're sort of working and they bleed and exhaust an army. So it's a little bit of guerrilla warfare going on. And do you think that criminal gangs can operate in Russia and China without the government knowing all about them? Well, clearly, there was an interview back in 2016. Megyn Kelly interviewed Vladimir Putin, and they say, why didn't you arrest the hackers who interfered in the 2016 US election? And Putin said there was nothing to arrest them for since they did not break Russian law. In general, as long as hackers attack non-Russian targets, the Russian government will not hassle them. So it's pretty clear that the ransomware industry is growing explosively in Russia. It helps generate income for Russia, and it's clear that the Russian government will not prosecute cyber criminals for acts outside Russia. So again, you know, and the situation has only grown worse because of the Russo-Ukrainian war. You know, Russia, I think, now feels less and less reason to hold back on attacks and is encouraging a lot of these attacks. The Chinese government works closely with Chinese companies also to infiltrate US companies and put backdoors into chips and things like that. So it's complicated. So number one, you have to understand who your enemy is, and you may be surprised at who your enemies are. Second thing is know yourself. This is a serious problem. Your own people are one of the biggest security one of the security breaches. I mean, one of the security problems in your own organization are your own people. Security is a bother. It's too abstract. Many people don't think they can do anything about it. There's a sense of hopelessness. Lots of companies give this kind of trivial cybersecurity training every year to their employees. And the question is, do you think this cybersecurity training is sufficient to really protect? What are the most common causes of data breach? Well, the most common cause is weak or stolen credentials, passwords, people who use passwords like 1234, stuff like that, backdoors, vulnerable software, people phishing emails. It's a huge, huge problem. Social engineering, too many permissions, too many people who have access to information they don't need to know. I've often been shocked as a university employee. I have access to lots of records, of student records, many of which are completely irrelevant. I mean, I don't need to know the address of my students. I don't need to know their social security numbers. You know, to me, they're students. I just need to be able to collect, you know, material from them, give material to them. I don't need to know how old they are. I don't need to know all this sort of stuff. But yet, in most organizations, all that information is given to way too many people. insider threats. Some of the insider threats are deliberate, some are accidental because people are careless. Also, there are all kinds of improper configurations, user errors. So what can you do about it? One of the things that you can do, which is a useful exercise, comes from a paper by Bruce Schneider, and it's the concept of attack trees. And assume that any system can be broken, and the job is to figure out how that might happen and how to improve the security of the whole system. So you must make the penetrating a system must be made as difficult and expensive as possible. And the reason they're called attack trees is because they look something like this. You want to open a safe, and these are the different ways you can think of opening the safe. You can pick the lock, you can learn the combination, you can cut the safe open, or you can cause the safe to be installed improperly in some way so that it would be easy to break into it. And then you can say, well, how can you learn the combination? You can find the written combination, or you can buy the combination from somebody. And how can you get it? You can threaten the person, you can blackmail them, you can eavesdrop on them, you can bribe. So basically, you notice we've also added estimated costs here. So to cut a safe open might be the cheapest route, you know, because that's what we say, open the safe is 10K. That's because of this option. But there are all these different options, and all attacks that are less than $100,000. So you can do this exercise, and you don't need a lot of technical training. I mean, for some things you do, but oftentimes common sense can help you, you know, analyze a situation. So you must understand your system, must keep current. You have to understand your potential attackers, what their abilities are. And typically, one of the things that's true is that most cyber attackers, most hackers, have more ability than most defenders. Lots of companies have people who are in charge of cybersecurity who don't really know much about it, and certainly don't understand it technically, whereas you can be sure that the people trying to crack into your organization are much more technically sophisticated than a lot of people who are on the defensive side. So security is a process. You can't just do it once and be secure. And you have to go through this exercise, and you have to create a culture of security and work at it constantly. The cybercrime organization is working at it constantly. You can be sure that any time there's a technical advance, something like, you know, modern AI systems and things like that, you can be sure that some of the first people who are going to be implementing it are going to be cyber criminals. And you're most vulnerable when you think you are secure, because you stop working on security. And so you need to work on it constantly, and you need to start working ASAP. So how can you get started? Well, you can do yourself attack trees. You can get free software, or there's commercial software to create nice looking attack trees. But actually, everybody can start with the attack tree software built into Microsoft Office. What I mean by that, PowerPoint is actually a very good tool for making attack trees, and your staff knows how to use it. And in particular, if you go to the smart art section of PowerPoint, you get a lot of options. One of them are these hierarchy diagrams, and you can choose whatever style. And so here is a PowerPoint representation of the attack tree that I showed you at the beginning. And here it is sort of, you know, blown up, and everybody knows how to use PowerPoint in, well, most everybody knows how to use PowerPoint in most organizations. And you can start this exercise of saying, not only what are our vulnerabilities, but how can you attack them? What data do we have to store? How can it be defended? Okay, so you see here's the original diagram from Bruce Schneier's paper. Here's the PowerPoint version. And one of the things that you can make PowerPoint slides very large. So you can make very large attack trees. You're not just bound by, I mean, you can go and set your page size to be gigantic and make titanic attack trees. And of course, if they start getting too complicated, then they become less useful. You need to somehow find the balance between enough detail and not too much detail. Another very good tool is NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology in the United States, has published a cybersecurity framework. And the idea is that you go through this framework. It's kind of a self-study, but it focuses your attention on lots of issues. And you can get this framework for free. And anybody in the world can get this. Just go to nist.gov cyber framework and get this. And they have a more complicated framework as well. And, you know, this takes you through 900 security requirements. But the important thing is that it forces you to think about what you're doing to create a secure organization. Also, this is free. All of NIST's materials are free. And also, they have a quick start guide and many, many useful publications on the NIST site. So it asks you even some basic questions. Who are your officers? Who are your board of directors? Who are the people in your field, in your company who work on cybersecurity? What's the worth of the organization? What are the profit sharing plans? I mean, there are things like this that people normally don't think about from a cybersecurity perspective. But you notice that if you're dealing with a if you're dealing with a nation state, for them to bribe somebody with $50,000 or something is not a big deal. It's a big deal to the person being bribed, but it's not a big deal to the organization. Okay, so one of the things is, you know, are you operating in many countries? Are you operating in countries where the nation can put pressure on your employees to turn over secrets and data? You get copies of the organization report. One of the things I've done is I've taken this NIST framework and turned it into a Word document, so you can just kind of fill it in. And this is what it looks like. So if you're interested in a copy, send me an email and I'll send you this. So this is just the blank document. You can see it goes on. Just a blank document is almost 90 pages. So when you put that together, you're going to have a very comprehensive report about the cyber security structure of your organization. And this is using another cybersecurity tool called Microsoft Word. So you notice you can use PowerPoint, you can use Word. I also have an application that you can use Excel for, which I don't have time to discuss in this talk. But tools like that, I think it's important to put tools in the hands of people, and you're not going to train them to, you know, do all kinds of the firewall specifications or things like that, but they can do these kinds of things, and you'll be surprised. I had students do this for public companies, and we were shocked at the kinds of things that we found just open, back doors, all sorts of things. So one of the things you can do is you can have two teams apply the NIST framework to your organization. One team is restricted to using only publicly available information, and the other team can use any internal documentation, then compare the two documents, and you'll be surprised at how much of your material is available publicly. So you know, so compare the two reports, you'll learn a lot. So this is a good step on getting to know yourself. Now, okay, I've already covered this. So again, many more publications making a business case for security. If you need to make a case to your organization for investing some dollars, this is a very good document. Again, it's free. Making the abstract concrete. So cybersecurity, most people don't really understand. They have a very vague idea. So it's helpful to offer people physical models so they better understand. So one of the first things that people come up with is the idea of a wall. And it's quite instructive to look at famous examples of walls. So people somehow feel secure behind a wall, but let's look at some famous examples. This is probably the most famous example of a wall in the world. This is the Great Wall of China. But as you actually look at the picture, you realize how vulnerable this particular structure is, because look carefully. You have a guardhouse, you have another guardhouse, maybe that's a guardhouse, but what you notice is that you have to guard something this massive requires many troops, and the troops are distributed over thousands of miles, so you have troops in these guardhouses. And the idea is that they could, by the way, these are not troops, these are tourists. So if you could use tourists for defense, you'd have it made. But with the number of troops that you have to have and support, this becomes a very difficult problem. And it also becomes obvious, how do you attack it? You create a diversion somewhere, so you pull as many troops over somewhere, and then you attack across the wall and get through it. But once you get through it, the wall no longer has any protection. The actual Great Wall system is much more complicated. It's not a single wall, it's a number of walls in various places. And so you can see that if you break through one wall, you might have another wall. You know, we don't want to spend a lot of time. A famous example of a wall that did not work is from World War II, where here we have the Maginot Line, and then we had these sort of weaker structures here on the border, on the French border. And of course, what the Germans did is they found the weak spot and came through it. And of course, once they came through it, the French were not really in a good position to defend themselves. So one of the things this shows is a simple wall is not necessarily going to protect you very well. Okay, so they expected the Germans to come here, put their troops here, had their fabulous wall here, and left this part unguarded, which is where the Germans actually attacked. So much for walls. Now, castles are another story, and a lot of people think they understand castles, but they have really a very limited understanding. And one of the things that's important for people to understand is that people built castles for hundreds of years. And there was a lot of experience that went into making them secure, and people thought a lot about the security of castles. And we really, our ancestors did not have the technology that we had, but they were also as smart as we were. And actually, you might argue that they were smarter than we were, because they didn't depend so much on technology. And they had to do, so I have some papers written on cyber walls, but here's an example from Information Week of a castle. Now you notice this pretty pathetic castle. If you just break in somewhere, you'll completely overwhelm this castle. There's no structure. It's just basically a wall that meets itself. And they say, if you think walls will keep your treasured data secure, you're living in a fairy tale. If you actually look at real castles, they're much more complex structures. They're often built in they get protection from rivers, from mountains. They are also multi-layered defense. You have a fortified town, then you have an outer ward, an inner ward. So they're defense in depth. Here's another kind of view. You notice here's the outer wall here, and it has the smaller towers, the bigger towers inside. And in fact, if you break in through here, you get an even thicker, bigger, taller wall at the next step. So one of the features of castle defense is you make it harder. The more you get to the most important parts, the more difficult the progress. Another thing about castles is they were not just passive. If you would go through these gatehouses, there'd be people pouring boiling oil on you and dropping stones on you. They were active defenses. You notice here, for example, you have ladders to get up there. If you take the ladder away, it makes it difficult to come down. You do have steps. You have, for example, this board here that allows you to quickly traverse, but if you remove this board, this becomes a bigger obstacle. You have many layers of gates. This here platform could be used to pour boiling oil on the attackers. I mean, the castles had a lot of defensive features. Here's a picture illustrating this exactly. You can see that the outer wall is actually much less formidable than the inner wall. The towers are smaller than these towers, and so the more you penetrate, the more fierce the defense. And then you look at this. This is a Kasbah from Morocco. Notice how complex. I mean, even if you're going to go attack this, it's not even clear where you want to start your attack. I mean, you probably start at the bottom, but you know, just having a very complex system for people to deal with. And of course, this is one of my favorites. It's quite a job to get to this castle, but you notice they're taking advantage of elevation and all sorts of things. But if you look at the different tactics that are used in a castle, most people don't know what these words mean, and we don't have time to go through it, but these are all part of the defensive system of a castle. So what are the lessons? Have a good plan for the entire city. Defense must be active. You have to have concentric defenses. Inner defenses should support outer defenses. Plan good foundations. Have removable bridges, pathways. In other words, if you detect an attack, you must also have ways of responding. You can disconnect parts of your system and all that sort of stuff. Most cyber defenses are very limited, very poorly thought out, and use guile and deceit where possible. One of the things that castles did is they would make it easy to go certain ways, and the reason they would make it easy to go certain ways is because they had defenses there. They'd have all kinds of traps, so they would funnel people. So again, one of the things you can do in your cyber defense is you can funnel the cyber attackers to where you want them to go and not where they want to go. And these are all the different weapons for the cyber castle. And many people don't use these weapons, but you need to have much more complex defenses. Okay, lock your doors, bar your windows. Now, how many doors or windows does your cyber castle have? Unfortunately, many organizations, if you have 5,000 employees, you have 10,000 doors and 10,000 windows because everybody has access to everything. And it's just wide open, and all you have to do is crack it at one point, and you're in. There's nothing further. What is a door or window in your cyber castle? If you think of your organization as a castle, what are your doors? What are your windows? Where can attackers get in? What about the Internet of Things? I mentioned that before. Do you have all kinds of insecure cameras all over? Do you have common consumer devices in critical sections? How do you secure these things. The most important lesson, security is a process. Okay, so the last major point I want to talk about is system accidents. So what is a system accident? This concept was derived by Charles Perrault, who's a sociologist. And what he was trying to say is that even accidents that seem to have a simple explanation often have more and are more ambiguous when examined in detail. So one of the most striking examples comes from the domain of maritime collisions. This chart shows you, here's a boat that's originally on this course. Here's a boat that's originally on this course. Now, if you would just let this boat go this way and this boat go that way, they would miss each other by a big distance. But somehow, because they're communicating with each other and radar, they're making adjustments and they end up colliding in the middle of the ocean when they were not even on a collision course. Okay, now you can blame one captain or you can blame another, but the culprit is to some extent of the rules that ships follow for trying to pass and adjust. So if they think they might be on a collision course, they make adjustments, and the adjustments are what actually caused the accident. So you can say, well, it's this captain's fault or it's that captain's fault, but to some extent, it's the system's fault. A really good example of a system accident is NASA. They were working on a project called the Mars Climate Orbiter, and they had two teams. One team used the metric system of measurements. The other team used the American imperial system of measurements. And now, what do you think happened? We have two teams working on the same project using different systems of measurements. Now, just think, what could happen? Could anything go wrong? And sure enough, it happened. Somebody forgot to convert from metric to imperial or from imperial to metric, and the rocket, when it was launched, instead of orbiting Mars, crashed into the sun. Very serious mistake. But again, you know that this is going to happen. If you have lots of people working and they're working in two different systems, it does not take a rocket scientist or a genius to realize what can happen. And sure enough, it happened. Okay, whose fault was it? Well, it was NASA's fault for allowing this to take place in the first. They should have worked in one system and everybody should have used the same system. And that, otherwise, this whole project and all the money that was invested ended up landing in the sun. What's the application to cybersecurity? Well, if your cybersecurity depends on every employee applying the minimal security training, then your cybersecurity system is a system accident waiting to happen. In other words, just as you can tell that NASA using two different systems was going to lead to failure, you know, you can say, oh, Joe made the mistake or Alice made the mistake or whatever. But the point is, in this environment, somebody was going to make a mistake. And you can be sure of that. Same thing, if your security depends on all your employees always behaving correctly, then you should expect that that's not going to work. Your system cannot be dependent on all your employees always behaving correctly. You have to put a lot more work into designing it. Another thing that is involved in system accidents is sometimes they're things you're not aware of. For example, we all know that HTTPS is more secure than HTTP because it's using this secure shell. But what most people don't know is in 2006, for 2 years, HTTPS was broken. People trying to fix errors in the Debian code accidentally removed the entropy, and there were very few keys. You only needed, there were like 32,000 keys truly available for 2 years. Most people didn't know that. Now, at that point, if you were relying on HTTPS for security, you didn't have it. If hackers knew about this, then there was nothing you could do short of rewriting HTTPS secure shell. Anyway, I have a paper written on this topic from the point of view of a system accident. And not only was there this vulnerability for 2 years, but it took a long time once it was fixed. This is the curve of the vulnerable sites, and you can see that it took almost half a year to get to the 40% mark, where 60% of vulnerable sites adopted this. So this is not knowing your system, not knowing your vulnerabilities. And the final topic that I want to talk about is hijacking a domain. I have a paper and a report on this called Interceptor Top-Level Domains. So one of the things that you can do, and this is a very powerful attack because the attacker doesn't even know they're being attacked, is you can hijack a whole domain. Okay, and the victim doesn't even know they have been hijacked, and you can set up all kinds of man-in-the-middle situations. So what am I talking about? TLD stands for top-level domains, and we're all familiar with .com, .org, .net, .eu, etc. And an interceptor, a top-level domain, is a top-level domain that is similar enough to another TLD to capture traffic intended for the other TLD. Okay, and this relationship is often symmetric. So if domain X can capture traffic for domain Y can capture traffic for domain X. All right, what am I talking about? Turns out you can have a website that is something.career, or you can have a website that's called something.careers. Well, gee, career versus careers, they differ by one letter. So if I have something like George.career and somebody sets up a domain called George.careers, it's very possible that someone intending to send me email actually sends it to the other site. Now, I wouldn't even know that went to the other site because I wouldn't know. And so, you can have someone who's called Smith at good.career, and Jones could set Jones at good.careers. And you can make this a catch-all email address. If you make it a catch-all email address, any email sent to anybody at good.careers will end up in this one account. Okay, so you can set up an account and you can capture all the emails. So like, for example, if there was an external domain called .ibms, instead of .ibm, I could set a catch-all, and any email that got addressed to .ibms, I would get. Now, clearly, this is a huge security breach, but this is not something that you could set up. You can create dummy websites and whatnot that look very similar. Now, I have written a report that identifies similar top-level domains. And one of the things that people don't realize that in 2014, there were 639 top-level domains, and the number grew steadily, and then it's kind of plateaued since 21, but there's still over 1,450 top-level domains. Here's an example of a restaurant where some hackers, so this guy's name is Heston Blumenthal, and one person registered Heston with 2 N's Blumenthal, and the other one registered with Blumenthal with 2 L's at the end, and tried to capture traffic intended for this restaurant. So these are real examples. They happen. This is an example of a system accident where the system is conspiring to undermine your cybersecurity. There are tons of, like, for example, at one point, just as an experiment, I wanted to see if I could register IBMUSA.com, and I was able to register it. And I held on to it for a while. IBM never contacted me, didn't say, hey, this is a confusing domain, but potentially I could have captured any any mail sent to IBM.USA.com. I could use email addresses with that. People think they're writing to IBM, but they're actually writing to me. In theory, people can sue you and take this domain away, but again, it doesn't cost very much money. And I have a report that lists all these. So, but protecting 20 domains might cost you something like over $10 million a year if you registered your domain in every one of the top level domains in the almost 1,500 top level domains. And some top level domains charge a lot of money. So it's like over $10 million. And IBM doesn't do it. The University of Maine doesn't do it. How does a small company protect itself? Well, at least you need to be aware about, like, if you are using something like, take even American universities have .edu on them. And I guess maybe other universities as well can use it. But there is the domain .eu, and it's very easy to make a typo. And like, I could, if I was in Europe, I could set up harvard.eu and start capturing traffic. So, and then of course, there's the whole topic of quantum cybercrime, which we're going to leave to another point. But this is, again, knowing the capabilities of your attacker. So at this point, I'm going to finish my talk, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Unfortunately, I can't stay for very long because I have a meeting back here in the US coming right up.
Thank you so much, Professor George Markowski, for an extremely interesting lecture.